Great stuff. So we'll repeat. My name is Nicola. I'm one of the co-founding directors of Flourish Together. We're an organisation that supports women to lead positive social change in all sorts of ways, from enterprise to innovation to leadership. And all week, as part of International Women's Week, we've had these Choose to Challenge themes that are important to our network. We ran one on housing yesterday. We ran one the day before on imposter syndrome. Tomorrow is all about putting the profit back in non-profit, and today, I'm pleased to say, is all about getting diversity on boards. And within and across our network, we've got the luxury of having so many amazing women who are in all sorts of roles in public life. And we've invited a couple of our directors, and forgive me, I'm going to pop a little slide up. It'll be the wrong one first, but then we will pop our little slide up so you can see who we've got on for you today. We've invited Sharon Amesu, who's a non-exec director at Flourish, as is Michelle Booth, and they're going to introduce themselves in a moment, so I'm not going to steal their thunder. And we've also got Anj Handa, who runs an organisation called Inspiring Women Changemakers, but she does various other things as well, as they all do. We tried to create a mix of women who have got different perspectives. We've got people who've been running and leading networks. We've got people who have been on public sector strategic boards. We've got people who are more in academia, but also in grassroots community boards, just to mix things up. Look at the ways and the why-fors as to what led people into doing this, but also try and get under the skin of the kinds of change that people were trying to make as part of that, if they realised it. Sometimes these things happen by accident, but also looking at the here and now and looking at the gaps and the opportunities, and how we can support more people to create more diverse boards, and why that might be an important thing to do. So I think without further ado, I will stop prattling on. Feel free to put any thoughts, comments, questions in the chat. We will come for questions. We're going to hear from our speakers, and then I've got a whole bunch of questions, and I'm hoping others might too, or might be sparked to ask what they like in the chat, and we will go off speaker as well in a little while. So who should we pick on first? I might try and come to Sharon first, if I may.
Sure.
Seeing as I'll go in the order of proceedings on the screen, and then you know what's happening. So far away, Sharon. Firstly, thank you so much for making the time. As everybody here today, no doubt juggling a million things and busy with all sorts. We're really pleased that you've come along to this one. Obviously, you've got heaps of experience in a range of different capacities, not least leading the chapter recently at the Institute of Directors. So you've seen it at all levels and across all sectors, and you lead your own organisation as well as sitting on our groups too. So tell us, how did you get into this, and what's been your journey into getting on boards and trying to effect change?
Okay, first of all, Nicola, can I say a huge thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation with other incredible women, and to be able to sort of lend my voice to this conversation. Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you virtually. So we, as I was reflecting on this question around how I got into this, I thought it quite interesting, because those sorts of questions give you the opportunity to reflect, don't they? And really start thinking, well, how actually did I get into this? Was it by design, or was it really organic? And I think it's a mix of both in many ways. I've for many years been involved in working at a community level and supporting community groups at decision-making levels. And that really finds its roots in the fact that I came from a Christian community, a church community, and there were various community initiatives that I was involved in. And that just came about because oftentimes I was the person in the room, or I was the person around, and it was literally, oh, you've got something to say, just add value. So there was no orchestration behind it, there was no design, it was very much organic, someone seeing skills that I may have, or seeing potential and saying, bring your voice into that. As I think about sort of the more formal understanding that we have around boards and so on. Again, it was very much the case that it was as a result of other people seeing possibilities and potential that I was drawn into the world of board level leadership. There was no pathway, as it were. I certainly didn't see how you enter into that world. It was not known to me. It was not in my network, as it were. It was very much, and I can pinpoint to a particular relationship that was forged that really opened up my understanding some more to this. And it was actually with Claire Ebury, who was the regional director of the Institute of Directors. And it was as a result of having conversations with Claire Ebury, and this will in due course come on to the whole idea of sponsorship from people who are not from minoritized communities. But it was really as a result of her seeing potential and connecting dots that I became introduced into this world. And as a result, my network began to build, my understanding, my awareness, my influence began to grow. And that's how opportunities came my way and the dots became more connected. And I think that was very much organic. As a result of me being in the space, I then began to see what was in the landscape and become more strategic about where I wanted to go. And so then my board engagement became by design, as opposed to just organic and by default. So I'd very much say that it was as a result of both organic and by design. As far as my background is concerned, I was a criminal barrister for 16 years before coming into the world of work that I'm currently now operating in. And so it was a very different world from even being involved in board level leadership. But what I do know, and something that I'm sure we'll explore today, is that the skills that we develop in one sector or one area are certainly transferable into board level leadership. And there are real opportunities out there. I think I've taken my 2 minutes or so,
Oh,
Michaela.
no, you're fine. You are fine, but it's good to get that sort of first flavour of things. I wonder, do you want to say anything just a bit about the organisation that you've developed now? Because you've gone from sort of having your potential spotted and growing in various ways, coming out of a particular career and for various reasons, and then looking at being, the strategic thinking around this. You're currently in the process, or you've recently been setting up your own organisation. So from sitting on somebody else's board, you're now going to be starting to lead your own. So I just wonder.
Yeah. So it was really as a result of conversations between myself and my daughter. As I said, I was in practice as a criminal barrister for 16 years, and this was many years ago. My daughter is now on her own journey into the legal profession. She's doing her post-grad bar course, going through the whole process of making applications and the like. But what's really interesting is that whilst in many ways the world is very different for her, and there are certainly more opportunities than I had when I was starting out in my legal career, what we began to understand through our conversations is that in many ways, whilst there had been shift, movement, progression, there hadn't been enough. And there were still issues, still barriers, still challenges that I had faced that she was now facing as a Black woman entering into the profession. What we then began to do is just have some more chats with people who were around us, her peer groups, my own peers. And we realized that, the challenges are in fact still very much embedded, commonplace and real. And to use the old quote, as it were, adage, we could sit on the sidelines and complain about what we're seeing, or actually we could get into the rumble of this and lend our voice. And so together we founded She Leads for Legacy, and it's a community that is committed to the acceleration of Black female leaders into senior leadership and board level positions. Because what we began to realize is that actually where we need these voices, where we need minoritized groups, is in decision-making roles. Because that's where change really starts to happen. It's where culture is set. It's where decisions are made. It's how things are shaped. And if we're not at the table, then decisions will be made that impact our lives over which we have no influence. And so the aspiration and ambition of She Leads for Legacy that I've co-founded with my daughter is that we create a platform, not simply actually for Black female leaders, though that's the aim, but we're doing it in partnership. So one of the things that we often talk about when we're explaining the work that we are doing is that we're doing it in partnership. It's in partnership with allies, ally organizations, because when you are seeking to disrupt, when you're seeking to dislodge, then you can't do that alone. You have to do that in company, in partnership with those who do have the keys, those who are sat at the table. So we're very much along the lines of working together collaboratively, raising awareness, increasing understanding, creating shared awareness of the challenges, and then providing solutions together.
I just thought it was good that people sort of get to hear that new phase that you're moving into as well. And I know that I've been to some of your sessions so far, and I just love it. And I love the language, and I love the insights. And I feel like we've been robbed, not having more Black women at the table, having come to that first event. So thank you. Thank you for joining.
We've really appreciated your support, and it highlights the point, actually, Nicola, because one of the things that you have done, and this is not about me being your friend and glossing over, but actually saying it has been ally relationships like the one you and I have. You have been the greatest champion. You have been a door opener. You have been a cheerleader. That's where the change happens. It's in those relationships and those partnerships that we really start to see change happen. It's to get flourishing together. And so I really just want to sort of posit that as a really important piece in this.
Fab. Well, guest one down, two to go. So Michelle, if you're for me, that's fantastic. And do you want to share a bit about your journey? Obviously, you're another director of ours. You're based up in the Northeast. People will know a lot of our work tends to happen in and around Greater Manchester and the Northwest, but with world domination in our sight, so not quite. In fact, it was one of those kind of by accidents, wasn't it? That in us looking at reinvigorating our board and realizing after a piece of work that we did a number of years ago for GMCVO and the BME network, in looking at, it was before all of the charity so white type stuff that's been around lately. We did some research looking into diversity in the voluntary community sector, the support, the investments that get made and everything else. And as a course of doing that work, we recognized actually we needed to sort ourselves out and think about what we were going to do. And at that point, we actually overnight became a BME-led organisation. And it was at that point as well, Michelle, you joined us. So do you want to say a bit about what you've been up to over the years, how you've got into this, and tell us all about it?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so I'm Michelle Booth, as you know from my picture there, and I'm based in the Northeast, where I spend my time being a consultant, doing business support predominantly with social enterprises. I teach at Northumbria University, and I'm also studying a PhD there. And I also run a couple of social enterprises up there as well. My journey into all this has been a little bit similar to Sharon's, in the sense that it was a little bit organic in the early days. I think the first board I ever sat on was when I was in a youth group, and it was a board about developing, what do we want to see in our youth group? And that was the first time I realized that, by joining these kind of, structures, you were able to have a voice and have a say and help to shape things. And then I went off to university and kind of got involved with the student union exec and things like that. And then when I left uni, I came back to the village where I was born and grew up. And at that time, they were looking at getting a new community centre. So my dad kind of went, come on, you know, we've helped you to get through university, it's time for you to give back to your community type thing. So I got involved with that board, and it just seemed to go from there. So I've often found my development in boards to be both about developing my social capital, but also my human capital by getting new skills. As a young person, and I say young, I'm 41 now, you know, it was around kind of developing skills in leadership, skills in all sorts of different things to be able to sell myself in job situations. And that just kind of developed from there into developing my own social enterprises, where, you know, I'm part of a board, and obviously being part of Nikayla's board as a non-exec director as well. And I think what it's done for me is give me the opportunity to realise that we do have a voice. And I have been invited onto boards to fill quotas as well. I put a tweet out this morning when I was reflecting, sitting there with my cup of coffee this morning, thinking about, right, we're going to have this conversation about diversifying boards, and thinking about my own journey. And I remember being asked when I was about 28 to come onto this board that was all male led. And the reason being was because the guys thought that the staff needed a cuddle once in a while and they couldn't deal with tears because we were about to make some redundancies. And I was kind of, no, you've totally and utterly missed the point. I've also been on boards that were pretty much male dominated as a young woman, and being basically there to take the minutes and make the tea. Again, missed the point. So from then on, I've always kind of looked at what can we do to not just fill numbers, but to actually stamp the voice of women as being on boards, because it makes boards more productive. It's better governance. You know, for a business, come on, we're 50% of the population out there. We're 50% of businesses' customers. And if our views and values aren't represented around the board table, how can you connect with your customers as well? And this is something, I had a really, really cracking conversation on Monday with my students around gender equality and how we see male and female roles in the workplace. And what is really interesting is my students, my male students, were really not seeing that at all. They were seeing the value in the women in the group, in the teams, because we do a lot of experiential learning. So you end up with little mini boards in the groups anyway. And they were saying, well, you know, the girls has brought some absolutely awesome skills to the table. And it's great to see our next generation thinking like that. We're getting attacked by a male cat here. So going. he's got to appear. So yeah, so it's my journey being by design or by organic, a bit of both. Yeah. But it's had that connection through about voice. It's about helping to make a difference, and I think that's where I've come from for my board journeys.
Wow. Thanks, Michelle. And yeah, mixed bag there, and great that you're in that academic role, sort of influencing the next generation on some of this stuff too.
Yeah.
Last but not least, Anj, come and tell us all about it. I know you've got a weird and wonderful journey, and got both a kind of local to kind of you know, super strategic sort of journey with some of the work that you do. And I know that you also now train and support people. You've been doing that this morning, so tell us where it began and how is it going? I think you're on mute at the minute, Anj. Are you all right to?
Yeah. Would it be possible to go on speaker view, Nikayla?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm just going to, I'm still letting people in as we go. So if I, as in that, or you want the full?
As in, just if you could remove the slide, that'd be great.
Yeah, there you go. People can go for it. Oh, strong.
Perfect. Oh, hi everyone. Oh, it's nice to see faces. So thank you, Nikayla, for inviting me to join this panel. My name is Anj Handa. I'm the founder of Inspiring Women Changemakers. We are not a charity or a social enterprise. We are a community of people that want to see fairness and safety for women in the world. And as Nikayla said, I've had quite an interesting roller coaster of a journey, which is roughly in 3 parts. So the first third of my career was in international recruitment and IT sales. I speak fluent German. I worked in between Germany and London for about 7 or 8 years. Then in 2003, I moved back to Leeds, and it kind of got me onto the journey of boards and committees. I became the director of a non-departmental public body. It was called the National Employment Panel, and originally Tony Blair set it up. So essentially it was business leaders at national level informing government policy about employment and skills programs. But then at local level, I ran an employer network of about 800 by the time I'd left, employers big and small, and voluntary and community sector and public sector. So that gave me some fantastic insights into what many organisations were doing in terms of their HR policies and practices, the way they were structured. But it also meant that I was invited as part of my job. So it wasn't really the kind of boards that I necessarily would have wanted to join, but I did as part of my role around investment into employment and skills in the wider sub-region, because towards the end I'd actually become the regional director. So I had two networks, one for Leeds City region, which was 12 local authority areas, and then one for South Yorkshire as well. And then I joined another couple of boards around European social funding. It was so boring. And then by this point, it was around 2011 when I became self-employed. There was what I called the bonfire of Quango. So central government were closing down a lot of its non-core departments, and we were one of those. But they gave us 18 months transition funding and with ring-fence redundancy. So I decided to take that, because what a fantastic opportunity to have that financial buffer and to be able to take the time to decide what it was I wanted to do as a self-employed woman. But I knew that I still needed to keep my hand in some of those strategic policy roles, or rather I thought I knew that was the right thing to do. So I took on a role which was for the whole of Leeds City region, and it was about European funding into employment and skills, IT, transport, so a wider spectrum to what I'd done before. And it concerned about £55 million worth of money for, you know, most of those programs. So it was pretty big scale, and it was good for profile, but it wasn't lighting me up. And then in 2012, I had a significant life change. I had one of my friends took his life. It was the second friend of mine to take his life, and it gave me a huge kick up the backside, really, to decide what was right for me. You know, what was my purpose truly? Where did I add value? Who did I want to be around? Because some of the boards that I was on, you know, Michelle and Sharon have shared their experiences. A lot of white older males, you know, there were local authority leaders and councillors, and it was just so dull. It wasn't toxic, it wasn't bullying, so I haven't had any of those experiences per se. It just wasn't the right fit for me. So fast forward a couple of years, and I set up my own business with a couple of others at that point. And at the same time, I led, and you can have a look at this on the website, I won't go into this now, but on behalf of an asylum seeker, I ended up leading a legal and media campaign that got so much interest from politicians, from personalities, including Richard Branson, and 126,500 supporters. So it's like this mega crazy thing that happened that I just hadn't planned. But it also put me on the radar of different organisations. And so one of those organisations was the charity I chair now, Freedom Studios. It's based in Bradford. It's an Arts Council England, what they call National Portfolio Organisation. So that means essentially we get 4 years worth of core funding, which we reapply for, you know, every so often. And it was one of the directors at the time, when I was in the middle of doing my Change.org campaign, was actually working at West Yorkshire Playhouse. She's a director that was looking after a theatre production called 9 Lives. It was all around asylum seekers. And she invited me on closing night to talk about the campaign and what had happened and raise awareness of asylum seekers. And she also wrote an open letter with various playwrights and directors to Theresa May about this campaign. So we forged this connection. and then we kind of drifted for a couple of years, and it got to the point with Freedom Studios where the chair had gone. They were new in role, so she'd left the Playhouse and become one of the artistic directors, and they had an interim chair that didn't know about governance or about equality, and that was what I specialised in. And it was a precarious time for them because they would have actually lost their 4 years core funding potentially if they didn't have a chair and board that were able to put in these governance processes. So I've been trained in good governance. I've been a diversity practitioner for over 20 years now. And so that really secured the organisation's funding. And since then, I've overhauled the board. I've got 3 new brilliant trustees that we brought on during the pandemic who are completely diverse. But also, I was approached by Leeds Arts University. So in none of my cases have I actually had to apply for a role. In the first instance, I was approached. And it was because the university's HR director used to be part of my network. And similar to them, they were applying for university status. It was Leeds College of Arts at the time. They wanted to apply for taught degree awarding powers, and they needed an equality lead governor. So I joined them 7 years ago. Now I am also on the remuneration committee, which I struggled to say, and I'm proud I've just said it. And I'm also the chair of the search and nominations committee. So that question, Nicola, that you wanted us to answer about, do you feel you can influence change? 100% I do, because we are having conversations on that board now, 7 years later, and got governors that all look and think differently. And I mean that in its broadest possible sense. But the proudest achievement for us as an organisation, you know, we are a university now, we award our own degrees, and our first ever Chancellor is Skin from Skunk and Nancy. And I feel like that's my legacy. I've got 1 more year of my second term left.
Can you get a certificate with us? I'm kidding.
I honestly just, I felt like crying when we had that discussion about Skin, because as an intersectional female, what an example. You know, she's openly gay, she's a strong Black woman who has a powerful global artistic profile. So that sends a real message to our students, I think. And it's the same with Freedom Studios. One of our associate artists is Balvinda Sopal, who plays Evil Suki in EastEnders now, but before that she was in our last production. So developing people is hugely, you know, getting that platform for others is what this is all about for me. And I love the arts. I didn't know that I could contribute to the arts sector, and so just it is a journey. I'm sure Sharon and Michelle will agree, and that's how it was for me. Nothing was planned, it all evolved. And I think what's next, I don't know, because I've got one more year left at the university, so I'll have to see where I want to go and make a difference next time. I think I'm probably out of time now.
No, that's fine. I'm going to pop us back to a kind of group shot there, just so that we can see you all, because it's fiddly, isn't it, when you're trying to see people and hear what's going on there. But I think been great to start to hear the journeys and the different routes in, and the different reasons and the different ways that you're going about things. And Anj, obviously you've touched on, you know, some of the questions we might look at. Because we're a relatively smaller group than, you know, originally registered as well, there will be plenty of time, I'm hoping, for people if they have got questions, or if there's things that have sparked for people and they want to know more. I would say if anyone's got something burning that they either want to put in the chat or they want to know more about, pop it in there and we can bring you off mute or whatever else, and we'll gladly involve you in this discussion. But I was just going to perhaps start by, you've all had such different experiences there, and it does sound as though it's been quite an organic thing. And you know, when we there were different reasons for putting this thing together. On the one hand, we want to get more women in more diverse roles, and we want to get more women into different kinds of boards. You know, so it's great to. In some ways it's about who you know and about networking and being out there, particularly in the voluntary community sector, and particularly when it comes to getting onto boards. It's not, you know, although there are routes and there are opportunities in certain newspapers or in certain spaces, it is quite an unknown thing. It's, you know, and so I just wonder, you know, how did you go about finding out, you know, how did you find out about these roles, and if people are looking for roles, I just wonder if we might touch on a little bit of that. You know, it's there's the who you know angle, but there's also where you look. Both from the point of view, I was just going to say, both from the point of view of people who are looking, but also from the point of view of people who were trying to recruit people onto their board, as well, be it you know, a small startup, an established charity, or anything else. So, Sharon, I think you were going to go first, and I'll come to Anj.
So there are your sort of your formal routes and your informal routes. The reality is, as we know, that it's mostly through your informal networks. That's the reality of this. And so it's the extent to which on both sides of this, we are able to expand our networks. For those who are wanting to recruit people onto their boards and bring diversity, the only way in which you can do that is by widening the net of participation, widening your reach, increasing your networks. There's one particular recruitment agency called Warren Partners, and a friend of mine, Joel Warren, who heads that up, and they've become very intentional about building, supporting boards with their diversity agenda. Seeking support from those sorts of organizations that are very intentional about that. They've recently actually received an accolade from the Hampton Alexander Review in recognition of their agenda. So how you can connect with wider networks and being intentional about that. There are also platforms that enable that to happen. There's one, and when Anj spoke, and I'll think about one in particular that I'm thinking about, but I can't remember the name of it. But the other way is, for example, for women, because we're talking about Flourish Together and our focus is women, there's Women on Boards, and that's an organization that has been set up to accelerate women in general onto board level roles. And they advertise positions on their platform. You can join, you can become a member. And they also help with preparatory work, because what I think is quite interesting around sitting on certain types of boards at a certain level, it's a career in itself. So you've got your local community groups, and that's a really good way to cut your teeth into what it is to be in a decision-making role. And I believe that everyone, whatever stage you're at, you can engage in that level of decision-making and governance. But if you're looking at, certainly in the, well, all sectors, I was going to say the business sector, but even senior, larger charities and so on, public sector, etc., when you're wanting to aspire to that level of leadership, then there is preparatory work. There's a CV for board level positions. There's ways in which you deliver a presentation. There's ways in which you interview that you'll bring focus to your experience. And so connecting to, for example, Women on Boards, and I say that because they're in existence now and they've been doing this work for some time. It's something that She Leads for Legacy will be doing later on in the year to really help us think about what it is to sit on a board, what is the role of a director, what is leadership for directors. But Women on Boards is a great place to have a look at various opportunities that are coming up.
I have a slide at the end with different opportunities, and that I think the link's on there, so I will share that. I'm going to come to you in a second, Anj. I think that what you say about cutting your teeth is really important. I'm sure Anj will have things to say around training and development, because she's a big part of what she does in the change org type stuff. But I think, what was I going to say? I was just thinking that, no, brain's gone.
I concur with you, Nicola. I concur.
Oh, I know what I was going to say.
Oh, go ahead.
It was you know, as much as you can potentially aspire to be on certain level of boards and this, that, and the other, actually, I would say don't hold back and go where you think you can make a difference, and go where you think people might be interested in your experience and expertise. You know, lots of boards are looking for people with lived experience these days. They're looking for different communities, they're looking for all sorts. And if you're running and developing a social enterprise, you might even only have ideas in your head at this stage, or you might have just, you know, filled in your paperwork for whatever, some constituted group, or for a kick, or for anything else, and you feel a bit like, oh God, what am I doing here? How am I meant to be doing this? There's all sorts of development and training that you can get from the likes of any of us here, actually, but sitting on somebody else's board of whatever kind, if it's aligned to what you do, if it can help build your strategic networks, is a real personal development opportunity for you, and there's a win-win there, I think, in some of this. But Anj, did you want to add something on that? And I know Mark had put some good questions in the chat there. So
I was going to, I'll take Mark's question, because some of it I've just put in the chat anyway. But so Mark, and this is from me as a charity chair and the chair of a search and nominations committee, this thing about quotas, you've got to keep an eye on the balance of your board, but you want to do it in an authentic and genuine way, not just to tick a box, as Michelle had described about her experience, because it's not good for the board and it's not good for the individual, because the applicant doesn't feel psychologically safe in that setting, and for the board as well, that person can't contribute to the best of their ability. So I actually say, look at your skills first, do a skills audit. There's too often this thing about a diverse board. If we get diverse applicants, they're not skilled. I mean, what a nonsense, and personally, as a brown woman, I find that quite insulting. So, looking at the skills, what kind of skills gaps do you have on your board? What are you recruiting for? But also really reflecting on what is the culture of your board, and being welcoming, inclusive, and doing the work yourself to reach out to more networks and not just your own standard network, and put that out. And I think that conversely, for applicants, LinkedIn and other places are a great way to do that. On some of the training that I deliver for getting on board, I recommend they use in their summary or their bio #NED, #trustee, and a few of them got approaches within days. I've put a stat in there, only 10% of charity vacancies, and that's specifically for charity boards, are actually advertised, but saying that 90,000 vacancies are advertised across England and Wales every year. So there's a lot to go for. Find the right fit for yourselves.
And if I don't know who Mark's particularly looking for, or if he wants to come off mic and say a bit more, he's very welcome to. I think we've got, if we don't know them, they're not worth having. No, I'm kidding, but we've got a very wide network through our networks, and they're all very generous, and they're all chomping at the bit to get whoever and however into whatever needs to happen. So I don't know if you want to say a bit more, Mark. You look like you're about to come off there.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really interesting. I represent a charity that's been going 54 years now. I think actually it's been going longer. We're a Queen's Award winning charity, so we've got the highest volunteer accreditation available, and we
say who you are. Are you allowed, or they think you were working?
Of course I am. You'll have never heard of us. Nobody ever has. It's known as SM4Cs.
Right.
It's a Sheffield-based charity, and we work to prevent loneliness and isolation amongst older people, but we also help hospital discharges. So you can imagine we've been very busy over this last 12 months. And our income has increased, I think, by 200%, which is massive growth on a year. So additionally, I'm also finalising my MBA, and my dissertation is on, and hence why I wanted to join this, it's on board diversity, and the lack of Black, Asian and minority ethnic individuals on boards. So my trustees have recognised this for a long time. They've tried to make inroads into different communities, and we have different projects that are running which are specifically aimed at engaging those communities and delivering the core service that we have always delivered, but in culturally appropriate and culturally sensitive ways. You know,
I'm
so
sure through our networks, we've got networks in Sheffield, we've got networks in Rotherham, and we've got networks across the board, if you pardon the pun. We, you know, following today, we can certainly follow up with you and help you reach out to different groups and get a bit more understanding of who you're after. And
yeah, that'd be brilliant. And you know, to take Anj's point as well, we have done a skills audit, and every time we get a new trustee on board, we revisit that skills audit. So, you know, I think it's always the same skills that are missing, isn't it? Legal, accountancy, you know, those type of skills. But actually, we really want somebody who understands the communities we're trying to engage with as well. So it's not just those harder skills. It's
absolutely, yeah. And
how do we,
as much
sorry.
as it can be good to get those on the board and where you can get them and where there are professionals that want to join boards from those sort of professional services backgrounds, all the better. But I think sometimes you get what you pay for actually as well. And sometimes having people who have that knowledge from whatever, running their own business perspective or from voluntary and community perspective, you know, can be valuable. And getting that expertise in from people who will deliver it for you rather than be sitting on the board giving you advice can sometimes, you know, it's a double-edged sword sometimes, having people from certain, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn here, Sharon or Anj or somebody correct me, but I've sat on boards where they've got the treasurer and, you know, he had a career in finance about, you know, 45 years ago, you know, or whatever it might be, and you know, what they need to create for funders now and what somebody from that legal profession thinks they need to do, or that financial background thinks they need to do, could be very far apart.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think, you know, when we're looking at, obviously our trustee recruitment pack does say as one of the desirable criteria, links with the community in which you're a part of. So, you know, whatever that may be. And it does have some of the other harder skills. So have you got marketing? Have you got finance? Have you got, you know, and it asks you to tick where you are on the matrix, basically. But it's also about, if you've always got the same type of person on your board, you've always got that narrow thought process that goes on. There's no diversity of thought whatsoever. So board diversity isn't just about the people you have, it's about diversity of thought. And that's what we're trying to do as well, because actually it opens up strategic opportunities, you know. So it makes and I know I'm representing the charity, but it makes commercial sense to go down that route as well. So
well, I think Michelle did put in the chat there about you know, the other angle on that if it's all well and good putting a position out there, but if you don't go and do the outreach and you don't go and build those connections with those different kinds of, you know, people of different perspectives and different thinking, you're not gonna hit where you need to get. And sorry, Sharon, were you going to?
Yeah, I was going to add as well, just to circle the loop, as it were. The organizations that I was thinking of, one is Be the Business. So it's just to sort of add on to Mark's point about how you can widen that network and increase that deepen the reach, as it were. Be the Business is an organization that supports with that. But also there's something called Board Apprentice, and Board Apprentice is a way of there's an organization that I'm a part of, which is called BURN, the Black United Representation Network. They're running Board Apprentice. And so what they do is they work with organizations who want to diversify their boards. BURN essentially find candidates who are board level ready, or certainly at the precipice of that. They'll be like a matchmaking service, as it were, for want of a better expression. I'm not wanting to be too crude. And they have this relationship where people who do have a different background are introduced into spaces where they would not otherwise have the access, and vice versa. So I think what's needed now more than ever in this space is creativity, thinking outside of the box with solutions and approaches that we take. Because if we simply use the formalized networks that we've used historically, we'll mine the same results.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's a good point. And
Thank you.
using those newer networks that are forming, as well as some of the I would say reasonable other routes. I'm thinking of different kinds of leadership programs where they've already relatively attuned or switched on. I don't know whether you'd agree with me or not. You know, organisations like Common Purpose and organisations like the Skoll Foundation have programs where, you know, broadening your reach and broadening your networks can be helpful in that respect. There's a great question come up in the chat, but Michelle, was there anything you wanted to add before we?
Yeah, I think it was just adding on what Mark was saying there about diversity of thinking and diversity of thought. And sometimes some of the most impactful people I've found on boards weren't the person who would bring the legal or the accountancy or the marketing or anything like that. They just brought a really unique view, and they were able to challenge the thinking in the right way and make the organization think about things from lots of different angles. And sometimes it's the same when we're recruiting people. It's about attitude, and if that person comes through the door with the right attitude that fits your board, you can teach them the intricacies of how to run a charity, how to, you know, run a company. But it's, do they have the right attitude to develop? Do they have the right creative thinking? Are they able to see things differently to the way that I see it? Because if we just go down, and it's been said a few times, if we go down the same angles all the time, we're just going to get identical thinkers. So kind of user-led experience is just awesome on boards.
It does lead into some other stuff here. I'm going to come to Carla's point, but it's also making me think around, you know, that what I see is missing all the time. I know we're talking about, you know, diversity in all its guises, particularly around sort of women in particular from our point of view, but young people are constantly missing and constantly underrepresented. You know, thankfully Jackie Weaver's started to that was her first question, the first thing, but you know, in terms of when she got that platform, looking at how to how to look at, you know, getting more young people into decision making, whether that be at a local parish level or anything else. But there was a question around encouraging people with neurodiversity to apply into boards. Absolutely. I mean, and not just from somebody trying to fill, you know, diversity quotas or disability quotas. I don't know whether you've got anything you wanted to add to that.
Can I add something to what Michelle just said about, you know, when you found the people? I am Mima, sorry, I present a little bit myself. I'm Italian, so I'm one of the diversity here, okay? So what I found often, like you said, Michelle, is the attitude of a person where you can teach them or you can, you know, show them what they have to do. But what I found, for example, when I approach to work with someone in a board and things like that, because I always collaborated here with the Innovation Forum and things like that, charity, blah, 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 is the patience that some of the committee don't have anymore. I mean, they want the things done in their way, so they don't have the patience to listen that maybe from another culture, you got another way to think. So if I give you an idea, for example, in my way, or in a way how I think, or I work in Italy, for example, that here can be a diverse from the others, because, you know, will be different anywhere, more creative, more different from what you normally do. What I found is that people don't want to listen to you anymore, or because they are scared that you took their place because you are more creative, more fantasy or things like that. So what I found difficult to, you know, until now, is 10 years I live in England, and this happens 2-3 times. Now, when you arrive in a point where someone is trusting you, is giving you the word and everything, let you speak and everything, but when you say yours, after they retreat because, you know, they are scared.
Really interesting point there, and it almost builds on what Mark was saying, that, you know, and Michelle, you know, you can put your stuff out there, but you can't always find them. And then when you do find them, actually, are you really ready, and are you willing, and have you fully digested different ways that you might have to adapt as an organisation to take on new board members or to be ready? And so I think that makes a really good point. I think Anj might have a couple of things to say on that, and then perhaps filling in some of what Carla was asking as well. So
I think you've touched on it really well, Nicola. To me, diversity is that it's about everybody. And so there are a couple of parts to this puzzle, aren't there? Because It's about the organisation itself creating the right warm and welcoming culture so that it can adapt and be flexible to whoever comes that can add to their board, and for you as an individual to find the right organisation for yourself. I talked before about psychological safety, and I really don't think people talk about that enough. But if you're an individual that is highly creative and you like to communicate and share, and you're on a board that is quite stuffy, that is not going to be good for them, because you won't stay with them. So, listening and learning about the kinds of organisation that you think will be a good fit for yourself is so important. And with the training that I do for getting on board the charity board leadership programme, it's people from every single walk of life. And I think disability particularly is so underrepresented on boards. It's people often talk about women or race when they're talking about board diversity, but for me it's much bigger than that. All different characteristics, whether it's neurodiversity, sexual orientation, are they going to be inclusive of you, and are you going to feel included? Because the starting point is, for me, speaking for myself, I want to add value and I want to be valued. And they're really simple checks to do. And it might take you time to find it, might take you another 10 years, but actually that's all right as well, if it means you find the right organisation.
Absolutely. It was just making me think back to, I'm Googling, I've not pulled it up in time. It was making me think back to the Social Enterprise UK Hidden Revolution board. We're all about social enterprise, so I will kind of fly the flag there, but there were some great stats that I will pull up in a minute that I haven't got in my head around the representation of women, and certainly over 40% now of social ventures are led by women. I know within the voluntary community sector, huge numbers, somewhere in the region of 90% have women on their boards. Unlike, there's so much for the public and private sector to potentially learn from the voluntary community and social enterprise world. Likewise, around 25% are people with disabilities on boards, and it's still a long way to go there, but still far better than some of the stats. I know I've sat on boards before, I've sat on panels before talking about this with the corporate world, and they're patting themselves on the back when their stats are 2 or 3 times worse than what we've been able to achieve. So I know the voluntary community sector is very keen to work alongside its public and public sector and corporate sector allies to help them understand how to do this better and some of the tricks of the trade. But I wonder whether, Carlo, I don't know whether you wanted to come off mute at all, and or whether Sam wanted to. You're making some good points there. Absolutely. I mean, neurodiversity is a strength in my book, as is dyslexia. I've worked with a lot of people with dyslexia who have an amazing creative brain. I did a design degree back in the day, and a quarter of our course had dyslexia. We were about 70 odd people, a quarter of them had dyslexia, and their ways of thinking were just phenomenal. But along with that, along with the way people have been treated, whether it's from any of these topics and perspectives we're talking about, if people have undervalued themselves or been made to feel undervalued, or we had our talk about imposter syndrome the other day. If people have been forced by accident or by the way they've been treated or through their own inner character to develop this kind of imposter syndrome that can manifest itself, trying to get them out and onto things and involved, takes some extra effort as well. So I just throw that one off. It was meant to be Michelle in a soapbox today.
Yeah, can I just come in there, Nicola? Because I was on the imposter syndrome board earlier this week, because I do suffer from imposter syndrome in certain situations. And I used some of my board experience as kind of stepping stones for me to realise, I do have that skill, so I can put imposter syndrome in that situation back in its box, because I've squashed that frog. And we talked a lot about, kind of, when I say squash the frog, it's taking the thing that you don't want to do and doing it. And my imposter syndrome at the moment is around writing my PhD, because whilst I can be in a classroom and teach, because I know my subject now, I teach, but I've never written a PhD before. And when they start talking about ologies and isms and all of these words that are like this long and you need a thesaurus to understand, you know, every second word, that's when I kind of go, oh, okay. But I've started to involve myself in more, they're not boards, but they kind of research collaboratives. So it's getting into a network that speaks that language. So I'm developing my skills in that kind of thing. But I think where I'm coming from is I've used kind of boards to develop myself and my human and social capital to overcome some of the kind of barriers I've put in my head and my place. And it's really helped by surrounding myself with other people and developing. And so if you feel, and another thing we talked about on imposter syndrome a lot was, if you look at a job application and you look through the person specification, particularly women, if we haven't got all of the ticks, we'll go, no, that job's not for us. It's the same with boards. I've managed to look at job descriptions on a board and going, do you know what? I'm not good enough for that board. And you know, I've learned to kind of think, well, I've got to cut my teeth somewhere. And I found it on a board it's an easier way to cut your teeth. You develop those skills and then you can get into employment with those skills. So.
And certainly within, you know, the voluntary community sector, a lot of what we've said earlier is, you know, whether it's that or whether it's others, a lot of these aren't advertised anyway, and being speculative and asking are some really good ways to get ahead, or to do something differently, or to find, I wouldn't say find your tribe, people say that a lot, but, you know, to find an alternative set of opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. Something to think about, isn't it, there? I'm conscious we've talked quite a bit about this particular topic. I think before I'm going to move on shortly to thinking about, you know, what's challenging about doing this, getting your experiences of juggling things and doing all of this stuff. But first of all, I was going to look just to have a think around, you know, we've talked about what some of the gaps are, and we've picked up here clearly, well, you tell me, you know, we've picked up on what some of the gaps are, but what it'd be great to hear from your point of view, you know, where do you think, you know, that the greatest amount of attention needs to be spent right now to make change in if, you know, if we had it in our gift to make sure that people can find out about opportunities or get the right people or diversify what they're doing?
Communication skill for everyone. It's very important, the communication. Communication is the key. If you know to communicate with everyone, you can have everything. This is the at least my point of view.
And but I guess as well from the point of view of thematic areas or particular areas of the community, I'll put mine out there and say young people. From my point of view, I think if we don't get more young people onto boards, we're missing a trick, because we're not training up the next generation and we're not hearing their voices in what we do. But I'm keen to hear from all of our panel really on any particular specifics where go for it, Sharon.
So from my perspective, I'm looking at the world of work, the future world of work, and also what that means. So we know from, for example, the Parker Review, that over 75% of revenues in the UK is generated abroad.
Yeah.
And what we know is that there's going to be increased globalization.
Yeah.
And that's going to look like, in particular, countries on the African continent and the Asian continent growing in their influence and impact and their buying power. One of the things about boards, whether it be in the private sector, public sector, or the not-for-profit third sector, is that we will have to be servicing an increasingly diverse demographic. Yeah. And that diversity in many ways, clearly there are there's the spectrum in terms of protected characteristics, but also in terms of neurodiversity, that's understood. The obvious one for me, especially as I think about the likes of the Black Lives Matter movement of last year and the renaissance of that, the resurrection of that, and the clear call for visible attention being paid to visible characteristics. For me, there must be a focus on race and ethnicity in diversity. For the reasons that I've outlined, the globalization, but also the very people that we are serving, our nation is becoming increasingly diverse. And there is an expectation, clearly my own focus is the business sector for obvious reasons, but we've got an increasing expectation from our key stakeholders that there will be visible diversity as far as race and ethnicity is concerned. And so our boards are in a deficit if they are not focusing and bringing attention and energy to diversification as far as that stream is concerned. What I'd also say is a danger in this, because what you just posed the question, what are some of the challenges, Michaela? And one of the challenges I feel is this lure of what's become known as the one and done. So we've got the one person on the board. They tick the box. I mean, take, for example, me, I tick the box of gender, tick, race, tick, done. We're done there. But actually, there's an organization called the 30% Club. And the reason why it's called the 30% Club is because what they found in their research is that if you simply have one person of difference on a board, that their voice and their capacity to impact and influence is limited. They almost become absorbed and morphed into this homogenous group. That actually it's
or just not heard because for some of the reasons that Emma was on about there. So yeah,
precisely. And so I think the challenge to look out for is when we're talking about diversity, that we deepen the dialogue and we don't simply keep it superficial. As you know, we've got the one, we've rung them in and that's it. But actually, what do we mean? How are we actually going to ensure that our diversity is meaningful, sustainable, and impactful?
Definitely.
No, I like that.
Yeah, and I think it's how do you embed that diversity into the culture of the organization, so it becomes part of the DNA of the organization and not just on the periphery of it. You know, I was working with an organization a couple of weeks ago who was diversifying their board, and they said, we're getting a cracking application for a trustee. And I said, oh, that's brilliant, you know, share the gossip type thing. And she said, it's a black woman with disabilities. How many boxes does that tick? And I just thought, oh my goodness, back to the drawing board. You know, so yeah, but then when we looked at the CV, it was a cracking application. They had every single skill that was missing, but that wasn't what they saw first, because they'd been challenged, and it was by the Arts Council around the diversity on their board for their funding, and it was like, oh, we've ticked that, that's fine. So there's a whole education piece and cultural education piece
within organizations and within boards that exist, but also by the sounds of it within these kind of what you just described there, this top-down approach that's forcing people to do certain things, but they're missing the point, and they're in perpetuating you know, ridiculousness. Anj, anything to add on that particular point around where the biggest gaps are?
No, because I think all voices are important on boards. That, you know, I don't really, there are certain underrepresented groups, but it depends on, you know, with your own organisation, where are your gaps? But it comes back to just what Michelle was saying about creating that inclusive culture and organisation where you can adjust and adapt to whatever needs people have. You know, if they have a need for an adjustment, that you are willing and able to do it, and not because you're ticking any kind of box or what have you. And I think just, Michelle, you know, as an Arts Council England funded organisation, yeah, they've got their requirements, let's say, and we're not at risk as an organisation because we've got our aims, we've got the board, but we did it for the right reasons for us. You know, inadvertently it is satisfying some of those things, but we thought, what skills do we need? Who do we need to approach to meet those kind of people? And we got them. So including a young, you know, in the UK, just in terms of, even if we're looking at race, there's Getting on Board's latest report was there were only 3% of Black and brown women are trustees in the UK. So as a chair and a university governor, I know I'm in a much smaller minority than that even, but that's, you know, that wasn't my particular reason. I wanted to be on boards. I wanted to personally develop myself. I wanted to build my brand. But then once I was there, it was like, well, I want to encourage others to come, because it does link, I think, to that self-deselection as well. Sometimes I think if Leeds Arts Uni had, well, they did have an ad in The Guardian. If I'd seen that, I wouldn't have applied for it, because I wouldn't have thought it was right for me. I'd never dealt with higher education and not worked in the arts sector. So part of this has to be about, as Michelle said before, that outreach and welcoming people. But when you get them, that you build on that, and that you really actively, constantly work on your approach and your culture.
I think that's something that's lacking in a lot of smaller organisations and in social enterprises, and there's probably something we need to do or look at, where we perhaps link up smaller social enterprises with either larger ones or other public and private sector organisations, where this kind of board development and this trustee induction, or you know, there's a lack of induction, I would say, and a lack of getting people into what they need to see and understanding their role and their responsibility, and a lack of consistency. You know, Flourish are potentially guilty of some of that, just we don't have the time as much as we would like to keep our board as engaged with us, and where everybody's very busy, and nobody's I suppose what I'm saying is that there's a lack of structuring sometimes in some of the startup or the smaller social enterprises than the more long-standing ones, and thinking about whether that matters, or at what point you have to grow up and change, you know, is perhaps something to consider. I'm conscious we've got about sort of 15-20 minutes left, so I would say if people have got burning questions, put them in the chat. I was just going to move into a question about, you know, busy women and doing all this stuff. You know, you're all incredibly busy people anyway, you know, busy running households, busy earning a living, busy. Anj made a good point, you know, in our last event, you know, why would you do this when you're, you know, when you could be at home watching Coronation Street or whatever your thing is. And I just suppose, you know, how do you maintain your energy and your focus with this? You know, and how do you make time for it?
It is a difficult one. Hello. Yeah, it is difficult, but I do it because it's part of me, and it keeps me going, and it spurs me on, because I love to see things come to fruition. I get a personal satisfaction out of that, and I love it. But I also get a lot out of supporting others to achieve their goals, and that's where I've come from. So, you know, boards have been my training ground, and I'm very active at the university trying to get some of my students into at least shadowing boards so they develop those skills. You know, I find I get my energy from others. So the more active I am, the more, you know, sparking I am with others. I get my energy from that, and lots of coffee.
Coffee, yeah. Coffee and Haribo, it was my diet for a while. I've gotten away from that. It's just coffee now, actually.
Just coffee.
Not one down it. No. Absolutely, and I think I'll come to either Sharon or Anj in a minute, but it's made me think again back to that imposter syndrome session that we had, where, you know, I was openly said, you know, I don't particularly have imposter syndrome, but you know, there were other things at play, you know, and I suppose as you know, as a full-time working, you know, single parent, how on earth do I make the time to do all that have I got to do? I think there's something about having a particular interest or level of energy, or wanting to do more, or wanting to learn more, but you hear so often you know, people are you know, they're not fulfilled in their lives, and you know, joining boards and being part of what's going on and being part of what makes the difference is really inspiring. And I also think, you know, I confess, you know, I'm on my own an awful lot of the time, and you know, one of the reasons that you know, setting up Flourish was to, you know, to build that network and to build that sense of community, and to build that you know, family almost around you, which a lot of the women in our network sort of sense and feel. It's almost like another family. And I think, you know, being part of the board as well, where, you know, people are, you know, we're saying that we've got lots of people in the country feeling socially isolated, you know, and it's being part of various boards, joining, you know, whether it's forums, groups, or being part of some you know, strategic thinking, really does help you connect into things, and so much more, I would say. And you know, it's how we get hold of people who are perhaps felt excluded or isolated, because they've often, you know, got such amazing ideas and such other perspectives to bring in, and really spurns them on in their life and their you know, whatever, you know, their aspirations, to be able to just see actually their insights and their experience is a value, massive value. And it's part, I think it's a part of our role at Flourish to make sure that we help people to see that. It's always the unusual suspects that have the best ideas and the best you know, attitudes for some of this stuff, I think. Anj, any thoughts on what we were saying there? Me prattling on, but
so what I get out of it, and busyness, I mean, we're all busy, but we have to make time for what's important to us. And like Michelle, this is important to me, and I think it's not wrong for you that we come to these things with some self-interest, you know, whether it's your own personal development, the people you meet, and the sense of team when you don't necessarily have team around you, or you know, the professional connections, your personal brand, all of these things, that we all have different reasons for doing it. And I think for me, just both of mine are within the arts sector, and what it led to, you know, I'd always liked drawing as a young person, but I was so inspired, I've always been so inspired walking around Leeds Arts Uni, that I started acrylic painting. I sell my paintings now. That's a completely unexpected outcome from something like that. And I think with the pandemic, it's definitely been way more hands-on. Even with a formal structure like a university, we've had to get involved a lot more. There've been various extraordinary meetings, and I must say at the start of the pandemic that was really tricky, because even though Inspiring Women Changemakers is quite a big community, I'm set up as a sole trader. So, you know, keeping my own business afloat, looking after the needs, thinking about furlough, all these HR issues. So I'm like a boss, as well as not making the conscious decision not to employ anyone in my own business. So that's, you know, it's kind of good and not really. It keeps my hand into stuff, you know, looking after employment law, HR policy, all these things, which is useful. But then it has its drawbacks, but I think the benefits outweigh all of that. I wouldn't not do it.
And I guess I've got a question there, Anj, in that, you know, a lot of what you do will be, you know, unpaid on certain particular boards, and it's a question that's not come up in the chat or anywhere, but you know, clearly, you know, on social enterprise, certain types of social enterprise, community interest companies and others, directors can be paid, but in a lot of other public life situations, be it on charity boards, be it sitting on anything from a patient and public advisory group to a, you know, a parent teacher association, or a governor of a school, or anything else, a lot of these things are unpaid. And I think, you know, how do we, you've described some of the benefits and some of the reasons for people getting involved there, but you know, how do we get more people to see actually you don't get, you know,
you're gaining something from it. I think that's what people just have to remember. No, you're not paid, but if the cause, and this is why I always say take your time to look for the trustee role, because there are plenty out there, and you'll find one eventually. But you know, you've got to feel passionate about the organisation or the cause, and that's what keeps you sticking. You know, I could have left the university after my first term of 4 years, and I didn't. I signed up for another 4. I can't do more than that because that's in our constitution. But you know, it's some universities do pay their governors. Leeds Arts University have their reasons for not, and the thing is, it's my personal choice to be a governor there, and as long as we make those informed choices for ourselves. And just to pick back up, Nicola, you talked about induction. what charities can do, you know, we've got Mark on here, maybe a couple of others, is focus on that induction and training and onboarding, especially in a trustee's first year, because they're still finding their feet. Think about the language you use internally, because too much jargon and acronyms are used, and that's a learning exercise in itself, and it excludes people. So just a few, I mean, really, that's like a whole workshop in itself, but just a few of my reflections about unpaid board roles.
Absolutely, and I think it goes back to some of what we were saying before about it. There's a real opportunity there, you know, for people to up their game. So I think for people who are perhaps undervalued or have been isolated or excluded, or and not being given the opportunities that they should have been, finding routes in this way it can be a real fast track to personal and professional development, actually, with the right support. But it does strike me, and hearing from other things and hearing from a bit about what Emma was saying before, there's perhaps a role there for, and it probably exists, you know, on the likes of Women on Boards and others, support for new trustees as a kind of sounding board, or as a mentor, or as a support, so that they know how to, you know, square up to, you know, any challenges or power struggles that can happen, that can be off-putting in looking at some of these options. We're nearly at time, so as I've said before, feel free to put any last questions in the chat, or come off mute or whatever else. I'm just going to just pop up this quick slide that Anj and I did a session a while back, and this was some of the stuff that we threw out as part of that, in terms of if people are looking for opportunities, either to get onto boards, to find people, or to signpost and to share opportunities. We were thinking, you know, there are people who found their own organisations and set up their own boards. There are, you know, executive and non-executive roles in this space. There's all sorts, you know, rather than get so formal, there's all sorts of advisory groups and panels and people looking for, you know, even getting onto focus groups, and there's lots of research and policy work that gets done that can give you a toe into these sorts of conversations and this kind of thinking. We've touched on things like school governors. Magistrates is another massive underrepresented area, and a huge way of gaining influence and being able to make decisions over, you know, what happens in the criminal justice system and in your local area. We've not even touched or talked about politics. We've got a lot of women in our network linked into big P and small p politics, and there's all sorts of options around that. If people are interested in that, put it in the chat and we'll let you know. And there's people on here actually thinking about it who are linked to all sorts of things, be it recognised political parties or otherwise. Councils for Voluntary Services, some people might have heard of on this call. CVSs in and around our area, it's the likes of MAC, Salford CVS, Action Together, Sector 3, to name a few. But these are spaces and places that are set up to support certainly the voluntary community sector in all different ways, and they've got recruitment pages, they've often got governance or trustee and organisational supports available, understanding the roles of trustees and all of that sort of thing. Different kinds of stakeholder groups, as I was alluding to before, every theme and every sector, from mental health to the way the NHS works, and others, you know, environmental networks. So there's all sorts there. Why anyone should ever be bored or lonely is beyond me, but that's just me. And I think there were just some Twitter links there to different places where opportunities get promoted. You know, there's oodles of them, but they're out there, and I just popped some links there that we can send on and I can put in the chat for the Facebook group, certainly for Flourish, Inspiring Women Changemakers, and She Leads for Legacy, which obviously Sharon looks at. So by all means, put other opportunities or other things you're aware of in the chat if you want to share stuff. We're almost at time, and I am going to come back and just hear from any final thoughts and any final questions. But before I switch these slides off, I was just we're having a bit of a breather. We're not really, but we've no formal events happening in the next month, I would say. We're just in the process of redesigning our events calendar. And so in the meantime, if you need your fix of something, or you've got things that you want to think about, you want further inspiration, our podcast series, which is here, Supporting Women in Social Enterprise podcast, that you can find on most podcasting platforms, or you can find on Audio Boom, is out there to have a look and a listen to. But I shall stop sharing that and come back to our group here and just check on any final questions. Otherwise, I might ask our speakers, before I thank them very much, just to perhaps we'll go back to that question around, what's been your sort of a final takeaway, and what's been one of your proudest achievements? Obviously, Anne's has talked about one. I'm sure she's got multiple, but it'd be great to hear an achievement that somebody was able to create by being part of anything, a group, a board, or anything else, just to remind and inspire us, why people do this. But I can't see any other questions, and nobody's coming off to kind of chomping at the bit to say something. So over to our panel, really. Michelle, you're off mute, so I'll come to you first.
There's several really, but I think the one that sticks in my mind that I'm most proud of is because it's my own community. So when I came back from university, we were about to lose our community centre. The council had stopped funding it. It wasn't being used in the way it should have been used. The current board were anti-kids. There was no children allowed into it. And my dad got hold of me and said, "You're back from university, you don't have a job yet, get yourself doing something useful." And it was the spurring on I needed, because I'd come down from, just graduated, woohoo, got my cap and gown, to, oh my goodness, what do I do now? And I'd figured out I wanted to do something with social enterprise, charity, that kind of thing. And I got involved, and we managed to save our centre and doubled it, and now it's still there. It now hosts loads of wedding receptions. It's the heart of the community. It's a community cafe. They do luncheon clubs. They've got a gym. They've got youth groups and everything like that. And I look back and I think, 2001, 2002, if we hadn't stepped up, if we hadn't kind of got a hold of it, where would it be?
Absolutely. So, yeah. Love that as a story. Go on, beat that, Sharon. You've got heaps. You've done all sorts. Come on.
Good Lord, that's incredible. I mean, there are so many things, but the most recent one is this initiative that I'm beginning with my daughter, really, and it's already having an impact. In our last session, our most recent session, where we were looking at Black women into leadership, and we had a speaker who was talking about her journey into leadership. Off the back of that, there were so many reports of women who were saying, I am now looking at how I can step up into leadership, whether it be within my community or within my organization, where previously I had discounted myself. And to hear that, to me, really starts sparking the expectation that there will be a generation of women who are recognizing their power and their potential and stepping into it.
Fabulous. No, that's great. And it's that you've just barely over the parapet now, and you're about to get going with it all. So we're very excited to see what evolves. Anj, there's been so many. You've already pulled one of your trump cards with skin there. But what else?
Well, yeah, that's the biggie. So I'll come to a kind of smallish one, but that was really great for my self-esteem. Like many of us, I don't like the numbers. I'm not an accountant, and you have to at least read management accounts when you're on any board. You have to learn how to get your head around them, and we had a board away day last month, and the finance manager told us all we'd onboarded 3 new trustees who were amazing and supportive in so many ways. But he said that since I'd come on as chair in the last 4 years, our reserves have increased 5-fold. And I was just shocked, that somehow I've stepped up to that financial due diligence, that we've really looked strategically about how, where and when we spend our money. And it made me feel great, because that is a personal development thing that's really internal, that we tell ourselves these stories, oh, I'm not great at numbers, I'm not good at this. So that kind of reminder or validation was so helpful to me, because particularly when you work by yourself a lot, you don't get that. So that kind of feedback and that visible result was a real win for me personally.
Fantastic. We've got some great examples coming up in the chat here if you've not had a glance at those, but I'll just have a sneaky opportunity to say, you know, there's heaps that, you know, we get to do through Flourish, and really enjoy what we do. And you know, there's everything and anything in those podcasts is things that we're very proud of in supporting people to develop. But just this past week, I thought I'd best just show my co-directors. We did win an award around innovation this week, so that we're pretty proud of that for Northern Power Women. I got shortlisted as Mentor of the Year the other year, which was a fab opportunity. But to be in the innovation category is exciting. I know. I do find there's all sorts of fantastic awards out there that people can look at and consider and get nominated for, and that's perhaps something we've not talked about in here, but it does all sort of link through to some of this stuff in terms of professional development, recognition, promotion of what it is people are doing, and more importantly raising awareness of the social issues and the challenges that we're trying to tackle. But I think that yeah, getting sneaky awards like this is quite cool. So I'll throw that one out there on the screen. Just, I've not had a chance to see Jo yet for her to actually see it, but I'm sure she'll get to eventually. And yeah, it's from little acorns, you never know what evolves and where things can go and grow. And the great thing about any of this stuff is you can, you know, take in things at your own pace. So it's horses for courses with a lot of this stuff, and having a go or getting the right support to you know, progress in the right way at the right time onto whatever opportunity it is. Some of those opportunities that we flagged up before. So if people want further sort of support or guidance around any of this stuff, we can happily chat and share information. There'll be a listen again link to this to kind of go back and rethink on some of this stuff. But I think for now, with us being at time, I'm just going to say thanks to everybody who's joined us, and lots to take away, lots to think about, and yeah, lots of inspiration in there, as well as to kind of, you know, the benefits of this kind of thing. And certainly, you know, the more we can get a whole broad range of diverse people and perspectives and views, the better. And you know, you've only got to look at the choose to challenge hashtag to see, you know why all of this stuff is needed. So thank you for having a chat with us all and listening today, and we'll catch up with people on future events.